A lot of you guys have been requesting a video on this, and I have to admit I've been pretty excited to check it out myself. This is the FiiO K13 R2R, an R2R DAC and headphone amp combo coming in at just over $300 that seems to have quite a lot of people excited. Why is that? Well, R2R DACs are far more commonly found at the way higher end of the audio market, with options under $1,000, let alone under $500 being few and far between. But is there a reason for that, or is the FiiO K13 R2R genuinely a new entry point into R2R sound at a far more accessible price point? I'm Golden Sound, you're watching The Headphone Show by headphones.com. If you're watching this video, you probably already know what a DAC, a digital to analog converter, is. It's the component that takes the digital ones and zeros from your PC or other device and converts it into a continuous analog waveform that, with proper amplification, can then drive your headphones or speakers. But many of you watching might not know what the actual difference is between the typical Delta Sigma approach that almost all DACs on the market use and an R2R design like this. If you want to find out the technical details, go and watch our DACs 101 video, also linked in the description, which explains how an R2R DAC like this and how a Delta Sigma DAC design actually functions. What you need to know for this video though is that a Delta Sigma DAC design can't actually just convert the digital audio it is receiving directly. It first has to do quite a lot of fairly complex digital processing to change the, say, 16-bit 44.1 kHz information, which is what most music is, into a far higher sample rate, far lower bit depth stream like 11 MHz 5-bit, for instance. Conversely, an R2R DAC such as the K13 can just convert the digital audio samples exactly as they are received, optionally with no digital processing or even oversampling whatsoever. This is why a lot of people seeking a more purist approach often seek out R2R DACs, and a lot of people, including myself, find that R2R DACs can have some pretty distinct advantages over other DAC designs. In fact, my favorite DAC, and the one that I'm using in my main speaker system, is an R2R DAC. But if R2R DACs don't need to do a bunch of complex digital processing, a lot of people really seem to like them, why aren't there more of them, particularly at the lower end of the market? Why are most DACs Delta Sigma? Well, the reason that Delta Sigma was made, and the reason why it's so much more common, is because in practice, making an R2R DAC accurate is really, really hard, and often needs a bunch of expensive extra development and physical components in order to actually achieve that accuracy. That's why R2R DACs tend to be quite expensive. In fact, just to give you some sense of scale, if you want an R2R DAC to have 16 bits of accuracy, then the resistors in the ladder need to have an effective tolerance of 0.0016%. That is not a simple thing to achieve. So what about the K13? Does it actually give you some of the R2R benefits that people are often chasing, and does it perform well at a far lower price point than many other or most other R2R DACs, or are there some compromises to be aware of? Before we talk about performance, let's quickly go over the physical design of the unit. On the rear, you'll see the IEC mains power inlet with the option to switch to and use a third-party DC power supply if desired. That's a nice touch. It's got balanced and unbalanced analog outputs, SPDIF and USB-C inputs, and then on the front, you'll find balanced Pentacon and single-ended quarter-inch headphone outputs. The display and menu system is fine. It's a bit basic, though I will say that the knobs for controlling the device do feel tactile and high quality. Being an R2R DAC, this does also have the option to run NOS, or non-oversampling. That's that no digital processing option that I was talking about earlier, just converting the audio samples exactly as they are. What I found a little bit confusing when I first got this though was that even when I set it to oversampling mode, it wasn't actually oversampling, and as it turns out, that's because you also have to change the DSD setting, even if you're playing PCM, to DSD to PCM. If you leave it in the stock DSD 1-bit setting, the oversampling option for PCM does nothing. It will not oversample. That was a little bit frustrating, and if you do get one of these, I would recommend changing that setting because oversampling is the technically correct way to do things, and in my opinion, sounds better too. Physically, I really like the design of this unit. I think it looks great, it feels well built and high quality, it's sleek, low profile, compact, and despite being compact, it's got all the I/O you could reasonably ask for. The only slight hiccup was the fact that the menu system is a bit basic, and then that aforementioned oversampling configuration issue. So what about performance? Well, I always do my listening evaluation before any measurements, so let's talk about that with some comparisons. Although speaking of comparing lots of things, myself and Resolve are shortly going to be heading off to the Vienna high-end show, and we're going to have some exclusive members-only content for that. So if you like what we do on this channel and you want to support it, consider becoming a channel member. 100% of the revenue from channel memberships goes towards us on the content team and the content budget to be able to go do fun stuff like that and make good content for you guys. You get access to exclusive members-only videos and also polls and help guide the direction of the channel. So have a look at that, it helps us out a lot. Anyway, back to the video. I'm just going to say it up front, the overall sound of the K13 R2R was a bit of a mixed bag. R2R DACs have a reputation for doing certain specific things, particularly in terms of soundstage, really well, and this sort of does. Listening to just about anything, it does give you a pretty holographic presentation, with things sounding quite spacious, notably more so than when I switched over to the SMSL RAW DAC as a comparison point. Tracks like Hold Me Down by Mansionaire were really good fun and particularly immersive in how they got more of an enveloping effect with some of the synths and guitar than having them be a bit more in your head or a wall of sound in front of you. The bit that it doesn't do so well is the exact definition of placement. Things sound kind of big generally and holographic, but then individual elements are a little bit smeared or unclear in exactly what direction they're coming from or exact location or distance from you. Swapping back to the SMSL RAW DAC, it was a bit more closed in sounding overall, but things were also more clearly separated and well defined within the space. R2R DACs also have a bit of a reputation for sounding warmer than other DACs, though personally I think that's a bit of a misconception. I think the reason this misconception exists is because many R2R DACs are run NOS, or non-oversampling, and non-oversampling will cause treble roll-off regardless of what DAC or hardware you are actually using. Same applies here. If we measure the unit in NOS, then we get about minus 3 dB treble roll-off by 20 kHz. Turn that to oversampling mode and that goes away and it's got a nice flat frequency response. So yeah, if you run this in NOS, or if you turn on oversampling but forget to change the DSD setting to DSD to PCM, seriously FiiO, please fix that, then it is just going to sound darker because it has a darker outright frequency response. If you enable oversampling and just compare the sound of the DAC itself and its distortion profile to other DACs, then the overall tonal profile is pretty damn neutral. Neutral, though not particularly resolving. Even the far cheaper shit Magni or dongles like FiiO's own KA17 sounded noticeably more resolving and detailed than the K13 R2R. Vocals in tracks like Runaway by Half Alive had a slight hint of graininess to them, a graininess that could almost be described as harsh or fatiguing in tracks with more high frequency content. And whilst fun in how enveloping it sounded, Puppet Theatre by Claptone had the overlapping vocals about halfway through much more blended together and less clearly separated than again FiiO's own KA17 or the SMSL RAW DAC. It's sort of like listening to music after having just a couple drinks. In some ways, it's much more enjoyable, it's a bit more vibey and immersive, but you're not really getting the low-level information and detail as much. The other bit of the sound that was a little bit disappointing was macrodynamic impact. If you are a fan of electronic music or percussion-heavy genres, then I'm just going to straight up say this is not the DAC for you. Kicks in tracks like 20SYL's Dust Clouds are usually really hard-hitting, but were slightly rounded off and less impactful compared to most other products I A/B'd it against. The one product where it was similar in overall impact was the HiFiMan EF400, also an R2R DAC. The EF400 I don't mind it so much though, as that's just sort of part of its overall warmer tone. Being warmer and softer somehow sounds more okay than being more neutral but still kind of pillowy. And then the EF400, despite being warmer, was also a more technically capable and resolving DAC. It also had better timbre for things like vocals. The EF400 was just one that I enjoyed listening to quite a bit more than the K13. A lot of people, including myself, were wanting this to be an affordable entry point into R2R sound, but sadly, I don't think that this gives you that. It gives you a glimpse at the holographic effect that some R2R DACs can do really well, but there are some significant drawbacks that come along with it. Ones that just don't exist on higher end products like the Lave Harmony or the Hollow Cyan 2, and as a result, ones that give a much more enjoyable and well-rounded package. And not just subjectively, let's have a look at the objective performance of the K13. Just as a baseline test, playing a 1 kHz tone, we get about minus 70 dB total harmonic distortion and noise, which is just over 11 bits of effective resolution for a full-scale output. This is not great, even for an R2R DAC. Other slightly higher end options, like a HiFiMan EF400, get about minus 90 dB total harmonic distortion and noise, and then the best performing R2R DACs, like the Hollow Audio May, get up to minus 118 dB. Sadly, as much as I would love if this wasn't the case, this is a big part of the reason as to why we don't often see cheap R2R DACs. They are really hard to do well in practice, and so for the more affordable end of the market, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to make one that does not have significant performance drawbacks. Swapping from the internal power supply to an external iFi iPower power supply to see if that makes an improvement, general performance didn't change much. Overall total harmonic distortion and noise is about the same, though we did get a little bit of cleanup of mains leakage at 180 Hz, and seemingly some of the other small low-level spikes above 1 kHz were taken care of as well. So potentially an improvement. If you have a nice external power supply, might be worth using it, but it's not something that I'd go spending loads of money on. Better to put it into an actual DAC upgrade. Intermodulation distortion was very high, going up to around -60 dB at maximum output. That's a good 40 dB or so worse than not just top performing DACs, but other R2R DACs like a Hollow Cyan 2, for instance. So that wasn't great. Linearity starts to deviate heavily around -70 dB. Crosstalk is pretty high across the board, sitting at -68 dB for all frequencies. Jitter or timing accuracy was really not great either, with a lot of jitter spikes visible. Actually, the crosstalk and jitter performance could lend towards explaining why things sounded a little bit smeared or imprecise in the spatial presentation. If you've got stuff bleeding from one channel to the other more than is ideal, and if the actual just inherent timing accuracy is a bit meh, it's not going to give the best spatial presentation. The K13 R2R is not an objectively well-performing DAC, and is a far cry in performance from cheaper Delta Sigma DACs, including from FiiO themselves. But people aren't going to be buying this because it's got the best measurements, they're going to be looking to buy this because it is R2R and is affordable. The problem is, it also doesn't hold up even close really in performance to other R2R DACs. The Headphone EF400 objectively performs better, and subjectively to me sounds significantly better than this if you are able to bump your budget up to around $500, and whilst much more expensive, this does not even really come close to either the objective performance or the enjoyment and sound quality that I got from the Hollow Cyan 2. If you don't want to spend any more than the K13 costs, FiiO's own KA17 dongle or a shit Magni, for example, are also just better sounding DACs. As much as I would really love if this was able to deliver on the benefits of R2R that I have heard in other products, but to do so at this price point, I just don't think that it's doing that. I think that there are subjectively far better sounding options and objectively better performing options for the same or less money. That's not to say that this sounds bad, it doesn't, and if you're listening to this right now on one of these and thinking, well, I enjoy mine, that's totally fine. Quite frankly, there are not many products on the market at the moment, at least in the DAC segment anyway, that I would say sound bad or that I would find unpleasant to listen to. Almost everything is some level of good, but for a review, I have to be nitpicky and I have to compare things against what you could be getting instead for the same or less money, and that's where this falls short. For those explicitly wanting R2R, for now I would say that it's better to either save up for the more expensive but significantly better sounding and objectively performing options like the Headphone EF400, Lave Micro DAC, Hollow Cyan 2, or hold off on R2R for the time being and go for Delta Sigma. Again, I like R2R DACs, I really do, but they are really hard to do well without putting quite a lot into them, and there is no point in buying a DAC just because it is R2R if it is going to sound worse than a lot of other things that you could have got for the same money. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you've got any other questions you wanted to ask about the K13, R2R DACs or Delta Sigma DACs, anything else related to music, gear, headphones, or anything at all, come and say hey on the Headphones.com Discord server or the Headphones.com forum, where I and other wiggly air enthusiasts will endeavor to help. Until next time, I'm Golden Sound, you're watching The Headphone Show by Headphones.com. I'll see you next time.